What's up, Soul Good Family? We have come to the end of the road in season 1 of the Soul Good podcast. In this week's episode, we are talking about the magnificent power of surrender and what it truly looks like to let go and let flow. Tune in as we break down our fears and obstacles when it comes to surrendering and learn how to trust in the power of this moment right now. Let's get into it.
Even with my wings extended as far as space will allow, I often feel trapped. Trapped inside of time. Inside the eyes of others. Haunted by the hand that could so easily pick me apart. And so it starts. The battle between mind and matter, and soul and heart. But what would happen if I stayed? The hand that haunts me catches up, corners me until I submit to the experience of what is, what once was. Would that be so bad? What if, instead of picking me apart, it moved me? What if it had removed me from the cage that was my pain and set me free? What if I was the rose that grew from concrete?
Welcome back to the Soul Good podcast. It's such a pleasure to have you in this space today. For those of you, if it's your first time tuning in, my name is Britani Rose, and I'm elated to have you in this space. I am a relationship coach, and I am an author and now podcast host who has created this safe space for us to talk about healing and for us to talk about the relationship that we have with ourselves and others, and have some conversations, real conversations at that, about sometimes things that we maybe don't understand or things that stand in the way of us having a positive relationship with ourselves and others, or sometimes just talking about things that we maybe don't understand in our life experiences. And so through the conversations that we have here at the Soul Good podcast, we're able to just create awareness, right? That is the whole goal and the whole focus of what I do here, is just to create awareness and educate people on how it is that we can grow within ourselves and how it is that we can grow within our relationships with others. And so I thank you so much for tuning into this platform. For those of you who are returning, shout out to you. For those of you who just decided, who is this and what is she talking about? Thank you for tuning in as well, because it is through you guys tuning into this platform that gives me purpose and motivation to continue doing what it is that I'm doing in this space. So again, I welcome you to this beautiful platform that we have here. And I hope that you will come back for more and more of what it is that we have to talk about here. So at the beginning of each episode, I always give you guys an update, and I like to talk about kind of some things that are just going on in your girl's life, because life be lifing, y'all. And like, it's been kicking my butt. As we all know, I think collectively we're all getting our butts whooped. That is like the consensus that I've come to, and also the consensus that I've accepted. And, for those of you who have been listening, you all know that I relocated and I'm still adjusting to that. Recently, I've just been trying to find more ways to just relax, right? Like, not just physically, but like mentally and emotionally. Um, After the Woman Evolve conference, I kind of got some more motivation for just doing what it is that I do in this space. And then I was just kind of met with a lot of adversity mentally, because there's a lot of great things that are going on in my life. But there's also a lot of things that I just don't have any control over. And sometimes that can be really, really difficult um, to deal with and to process. I don't want to give the topic away of what we're talking about today, but I mean, it's just so relevant, right, to even like what I'm going to be talking about in this introduction. So I'm going to try to keep it as separate as possible without getting into the episode before getting into the episode. Um, but like one thing that I just struggle with is not knowing the outcomes, right? Like, I don't know all the things that are going to transpire in my life right now and how they're going to go. And that feels very triggering for me. It's beautiful when you can just kind of allow yourself to just exist, but that's just something that I struggle with. I would be lying to you if I said, like, oh, I've got it all together in that department. I just don't, you know? And so, um, part of where I'm at in my life right now is just being able to accept that and allow what comes with that territory to come and experience that. I am creating more space for being intentional with this podcast, which means that I had to kind of shift my priorities. Last episode or 2 episodes ago, I talked about how I'm not going to be returning to school for the rest of the year, and that was weighing on me, but I'm kind of like accepting it now and moving past the fact that I was taking a step back from school because essentially it was best for me. um, right now, I'm trying to be more present for my children as well, because I recognize what being in this space and doing this work and going to work every day and dealing with mental health issues. I recognize how much that kind of pulls me away from my children, and I want to be able to be more present for them because the truth is, these are years of their lives that I'm never going to get back, and these are years with me that they're not going to ever get back as well. So, I think sometimes when you're a mother and when you're, especially when you're a single mother, you're just trying to do all the things. You're trying to meet all the needs. You're trying to be there for them. And you also are trying to build and do things for yourself. And it can get very difficult trying to balance all of that responsibility, um, without kind of losing your way or giving more to one side than you're giving to the other. And so just being truthful about that, I've truly been struggling. And so I'm sad that today is our last episode of the season, but I'm also looking forward to being able to give more of myself to my family and for us to kind of find more ways to be in sync with each other as we all navigate these differences that we're having, because they're certainly um, going through developmental things themselves. I have a whole teenager. My daughter is 14 and my son is 6. So they're both at very different stages in their lives, but they're also at stages where they're transitioning as well. You know, my daughter is coming into being a teenager, which, my God, you know, I was a teenager, but having a teenager is just not something that anyone can prepare you for. It's really an experience that you just have to kind of have on your own. And I know that when I was a teenager, I really just felt so disconnected from my mom. And it wasn't like I didn't want to be connected to her. It's just kind of that phase of life that you go through where you're trying to gain your independence, you're trying to understand your identity, and your parents just cramp your style. Like, let's just keep it real. Like, even as cool as I like to think I am, which I think I'm a very cool mom. That's not my goal, but like, I feel like I have a great relationship with my children, and I work very hard to not only develop that but maintain it, because I do want to be their safe space and I want to be someone that they can lean on and depend on. Um, and so, like, for them, my daughter specifically, you know, she's at that age where this is the most distant she and I have ever been. And in this space, it's hard for me to feel needed, I guess. I remember my mother talking to me about that when I went through this. She was like, you it was just like you didn't really need me, and that was kind of threatening to her as a mom, and I didn't really understand. But now that I have a teenager, I fully understand what is going on, and I'm also experiencing those same feelings and same emotions, and trying not to take it personal, right? Because like I said, I've been there, done that in terms of being a teenager, but I'm also a mother now, and I have a relationship with my daughter, and I value that relationship with her. And so it's like allowing her to have her own experience while also just transitioning with her in this experience and trying to be as supportive as possible as I can as her mother. It's very hard. It's very hard. One thing that I really just pride myself on is talking and communicating as much as possible. Sometimes I can be in my head about the things that I may think she's thinking or may think she's feeling, and I find that it's just best always to just have a conversation. So that's something that we've been doing more of, and I think that as I transition out of season 1 of this podcast, it'll create more time for me to just be there present with her, and even if we're not necessarily talking, um just being present with one another is, I think it speaks more volumes than anything, uh so that she at least knows her mom's here, you know. And then for my son, he's 6 years old, and they have such a huge age gap that he often is like the only child, or he feels like an only child, because my daughter is 14 and he's 6. So they have nothing in common when it comes to just, you know, like life and where they're at in their stages. And so I think I recognize that I would like to be more present for him as well, because he does kind of feel alone in terms of like the sibling stage now. And so, yeah, all of that is just something that's been kind of weighing on me, and something that I recognize that I need to be more mindful of and more attentive to. So, that is kind of where I'm at in terms of my life right now. I'm also getting ready to prepare for season 2, which, if you've been listening, I'm excited to share some new updates with you about the platform and how things are going to be changing. So, season 1, for those of you who have tuned in and listened to the episodes, it really was a 10 episode series where I talk about different things that I've discovered in my life that are very important topics that I feel others need to learn how to navigate, or we all need to learn how to navigate together, and just kind of start having those conversations. Because my whole issue is that I feel like, especially now, everyone just has this desire to appear like things are well and life is great, and they got their, you know, SHIT together, and like that's great. That's cute. But I represent a vast majority of people who are in this thing just trying to figure it out, and I'm okay not being okay. I'm okay not being perfect, and I'm also okay not having all the answers. And I think that the more society portrays this desire to like be perfect and be okay, it creates such an immense amount of pressure on people to appear as if they're well. And it's like, we ain't okay. They're collectively, we are all going through some things. And I think that we need to start having more conversations about how our lives have been impacted by our experiences, both good and bad, right? Because life is not always bad. There are some great things that are happening in a lot of people's lives, but on the flip side, there's also some hardships. And so as we transition to season 2, I'm excited because it's all going to be a more shared experience. So for season 2, we will be having guests. Every episode, I hope to be able to have a new guest on the show and have someone co host the episode with me. And so that they can be interviewed and they can be having an opportunity to share their life experiences, the things that they learned and what they went through, and how they were able to heal and grow from those experiences. Because one thing I know for sure is that connection and being able to relate to people is something that is incredibly helpful on the healing journey. I used to be somebody who was so closed off, and I didn't like to share my experiences with people. And the more that I've spoken up about my life experiences, the more I've been willing to talk to others and even just listen to them and their experiences. I've been able to form some beautiful connections with people. And so, my goal for season 2 is to have a plethora of people come on the show. And that includes you. If you're listening to this podcast, if you're listening to this platform and you feel like you have a story that you want to share, or you have a testimony you'd like to share, or you'd simply just like to share your life experiences with the world, or this platform, you are invited as well to send in an application to co host the Soul Good podcast. We are looking for people who don't mind being open, don't mind being transparent, and don't mind stepping into some vulnerability to be able to maybe help somebody else who's gone through something similar. Because one thing I find is that we are not alone. And trauma, as I've spoke about on this podcast before, has a very ugly way of making people feel like you're alone in your life experiences. And I hate that for all of us, because whatever you've gone through, I promise you there's someone out there who's gone through the same thing. And sometimes it's so helpful to hear how someone else got through it, and to just know, like I said, that you're not alone in your experiences. So for season 2, we will be switching up in that way. And I'm super, super excited to kind of put my energy into that. I already have people lined up that I want to interview, that I've been talking to, telling them that I want them to come on the show. So it's, I think, going to be a really good transition, a really good pivot into having more communal conversations. And that's just my goal in this space as well. So I hope that season 1 has been informative, has been something that's helped you kind of understand certain things maybe differently, or open your eyes to seeing things differently. And I hope that as we transition to season 2, you still will tune into this platform and listen to the conversations that we have, and the life experiences of other people, because I truly think that that's what life is about. And so, without further ado, y'all, we are going to transition to my favorite part of the show, which is our city shoutouts. And between last episode and this episode, we have some new cities that are over in Europe. And so shout out to Europe. I don't know anyone in Europe, and I just still find it amazing that people are finding this platform and tuning in all over the world. And so I'm just super thankful to have you all here, and I appreciate all of you who continue to come back, whether you're new, this is your first time, only time, returning, however you have listened or participated in this platform. I'm just very grateful for you. So we gonna shout out all the cities, y'all. There's 39 of them things. And so y'all ready to hear who's been tuning in? All right. So we have, first and foremost, my hometown of Seattle, Washington. Shout out to y'all. Holding it down per usual. And we have our beautiful people over in Frankfurt, that is over in Germany. Thank you for tuning in. We have Vancouver, Washington, Dallas, Texas. We have Spring, Texas, Houston, Texas, Spanaway, Washington, Conroe, Texas, Jacksonville, Florida, Kent, Washington, Mount Lake Terrace, Washington, Fresno, California, Atlanta, Georgia, Charlotte, North Carolina, Issaquah, Washington, Alsip, Illinois, Bowie, Texas, Grand Prairie, Texas, Scottsdale, Arizona, Arlington, Texas, Burlington, New Jersey, Phoenix, Arizona, Anna, Texas, Tacoma, Washington. Okay, y'all, this is a place in Europe. It's called Bradford. It's in the United Kingdom. Welcome and thank you for tuning in. We have Las Vegas, Nevada. We have another city in United Kingdom, which is Seaham, Durham, and then another city in the United Kingdom, y'all, which is Plaistow, Newham. I hope I'm saying that right. Shout out to y'all over in United Kingdom for listening to this podcast. We have Darlington, South Carolina. We have Federal Way, Washington. We have Auburn, Washington, Fairfax, Virginia, Miami, Florida, St. Augustine, Florida, Norfolk, Virginia, Lawrenceville, Georgia, Twin Falls, Idaho, Wakefield, which is in the United Kingdom as well, and Portland, Oregon. So again, shout out to all 39 of you incredible cities, all of you beautiful, beautiful souls who continue to come back and listen to the Soul Good podcast. I am just eternally grateful for all of you. And I, again, just thank you for giving me space to be motivated in this realm of what it is that we're doing here. So thank you. All right, y'all. So without further ado, we are going to get into what we're talking about today. And I'm just going to let you know right now that this entire episode is going to come from my neck. I got my tissues ready. I got my water. Like I was crying before I started recording. So I just know that it's going to be a process for me to get through this. But I just want to preface it now that I pray that you all bear with me, because it's just hard. So without further ado, y'all, we are talking about the power of surrender, like what it means to surrender, how you surrender, and what surrendering does for you and your healing journey. So the first thing I think of when I hear the word surrender is hands up, like don't shoot. It makes me feel like, okay, I'm caught with my hands up and I need to kind of like surrender to whatever's going on, right? And I think that surrender sometimes can feel scary. And so it's something that I wanted to talk about. And it's something that I want to make sure that we understand because it is such a necessary thing when we're talking about this healing journey. And so I've got a couple different definitions for what it means to surrender. Coming out of Merriam-Webster, they describe surrender as to yield to the power, control, or possession of another upon compulsion or demand. Okay. And so I thought that was a cool definition, but then I went a little bit deeper because I was like, that's cool, but I wanted to have something a little bit more practical, a little bit more easy on the ears, because when you're saying words like yield to the power, control, or possession of another upon compulsion or demand, that sounds kind of complicated. It sounds kind of restrictive. It sounds kind of like, I don't know, scary, right? And so I did a little bit more digging and I found a definition that was with Britannica that I felt like was a little bit more digestible, right? Like it doesn't sound so scary and it actually makes surrender feel like maybe that's something I might want to try a little bit of, right? So, according to Britannica, they describe the act of surrendering as to agree to stop fighting, hiding, resisting, because you know that you will not win or succeed. And I haven't done this in a long time, but I'm going to rewind, run that back. So, surrendering is to agree to stop fighting, hiding, or resisting because you know that you will not win or succeed. That's a lot to chew on, but I think it gives you a really good idea of what it is that we're talking about and how we're going to be using the context of surrender in this episode. And so now that we have that definition, one thing that I also did was find some synonyms because surrender is a great word, but I also think that giving you some other words that also kind of are cousins or related to surrender will help you understand exactly what surrender is and maybe also what surrender isn't, right? And so some synonyms for surrender are give in, concede, submit, back down, or cave in. And so the reason why I chose this topic for this close out segment of the podcast is because when we are dealing with trauma, right? When we're even just talking about the healing journey, surrender is a huge part of this journey. It is a necessary part of this journey because when we're talking about old ways and new ways, right? We're trying to go from old to new, and that transition requires you being able to surrender, right? Part of transitioning into the new is being able to surrender from the old. And the one thing that I've learned about this healing journey is that there is an absolute point of surrender where you will come to, and you won't really have a choice but to be able to give in, right? And that is one of those synonyms that we use when we're talking about surrender, giving in. Now, what are you giving into? You could give into a lot of different things, right? But for me, one thing I've learned is that you have to give in to yourself. You have to surrender to something, but you've got to surrender yourself in its totality, right? Your entire being. There comes a point in the healing journey for a lot of people where you have to recognize that your ways are not working, and it's not necessarily a bad thing. It doesn't mean anything bad about you. It just necessarily means that something isn't working. And in order for you to change, you have to surrender and recognize that change needs to happen in the first place. You also need to recognize that you don't have all the abilities and the capabilities to do all the things, right? So in order to do that, there has to be some surrender that comes into your journey. And when we're talking about, like I said, transitioning from old to new, that is a process. That is a complete process. I mean, when we're talking about the healing journey, if it's something as simple as falling as and scraping your knee, right? You fall and scrape your knee, it's bloody, your skin is ripped up, it's ugly, it might hurt, it stings, it burns, you might need to get some treatment, right? And so when you fall and scrape your knee, there's a process that goes into healing your wound, right? You might need ointment, you probably need a band-aid to cover it, right? And after some time of your body healing that wound, it is maybe a scar there, but certainly you have new skin. And that was a process of going from that wound to now having this new skin. And so we in ourselves and within our body and within our own healing journey inside, it's no different. We have wounds that have been created because of life and because of the things that happen in our lives. We have wounds on the inside that need to be healed. When we don't allow those wounds to heal, similarly to exterior wounds, you can get infections, you can cause other issues in your body. And so it's so important to be able to recognize that wounds need healing. All wounds need healing. And the ways in which we kind of divert or run from those wounds, it's not very helpful, right? I think that when we're talking about exterior wounds versus interior wounds, the one thing that can differ is like, okay, if my knee is bleeding, I can see that on the outside, and I might be quicker to go get a band-aid and put that over my wound, and it heals. When we're talking about the healing on the inside, we can't put band-aids on those wounds, right? It's not always the way to address those things. To me, it feels like putting a band-aid on a bullet hole. It's not effective. And so there's so many things that we do when it comes to our internal wounds to try to avoid doing that work, right? I think it's a lot harder to acknowledge our interior wounds or our internal wounds than it is to address and acknowledge exterior wounds. When we're talking about being hurt on your inside, being hurt at your core, it's so much easier to act like that hurt isn't there, right? It's so much easier to act like we're not bleeding on the inside because we don't see that. We don't see the blood. We don't see it gushing. We don't see the pus, not that that's a beautiful sight on the outside, but all of those things are things on the outside that let you know, okay, this is getting infected. This, maybe I need to go to the doctor. You know what I mean? But when it comes to our internal work, I think it's so easy for us to just be oblivious to the ways in which those wounds are infected, to the ways in which the wounds are infecting us in our relationships, right? And so part of what we're going to be talking about today is when it's time to surrender, when it's time to say, okay, you know what? This wound is something that needs to heal. And I can no longer run from that, and I can no longer escape that, right? Some of the things that we do as people when it comes to just trying to even avoid that, I mean, the list goes on and on. But for one, a lot of people, including myself, we hang on so tightly to those wounds and we don't want to address it. We don't necessarily even know all the baggage that we're bringing with us, right? And so when we're hurt and we want to experience a new feeling, we don't know how to necessarily get there. We don't know all that goes into it. And sometimes that can feel very defeating. And so we'll engage in things like substance abuse. We'll engage in things like alcohol. We will engage in sex, a lot of different things. I know for myself, there's a point where I just was like trying to accomplish a ton of things, right? Like I felt like accomplishing would help me not feel my trauma. And so if I were able to just become somebody different, reach these goals, and pursue a different lifestyle, then maybe I wouldn't have to do the internal work. Maybe I wouldn't have to take a look at the wounds on the inside, right? And so everyone has their different ways of not tending to their internal wounds. We also have our ways of trying to do the work without really doing the work, right? Like I was at a point where I was reading books, I was listening to podcasts, I would call my friends, vent to them on the phone. I mean, I even was going to therapy for several years before I addressed my most internal wounds. I was just there to be there, wasn't really there to be doing the work. And so when we're talking about, again, allowing ourselves to just reach a point of surrender, that can be very hard, it can also be something that we just don't even know that we need to do. And so that's why I wanted to talk about it today. When we have our wounds, and we all do, right? When we have these wounds, what happens is we're hurt on the inside. And when we're hurt on the inside, there's a need, right? We have a need. But because we don't necessarily know how to get our needs met, a void is created. And when we have these voids that are created, now we're reaching a point where we're trying to self medicate, right? We're trying to fill those voids. And a lot of people fill their voids in so many different ways. Like I said, we have substance abuse, we have alcohol abuse, we have things like sex addictions. Those are all ways in which people try to fill their voids. People will try to use other people to fill their voids. Like, oh, well, I'm not feeling like this within myself. And so I need you to help me feel that way. And none of those things are sustainable. And so when we're talking about surrender, to me, in the healing journey, everybody needs to reach a point where, or everybody reaches a point where you have to voluntarily have your hands up moment. Okay, well, at what point am I going to not do this anymore? Because it's one thing to say, well, I'm tired of these results. I'm tired of not being able to have good relationships. I'm tired of not being able to reach my goals. I'm tired of not being able to see the growth within myself that I know that I can achieve, right? But there's certain things standing in the way. And those things standing in the way often is our trauma and the ways that we don't know that it's affecting us. The way I envision it is like we're people, we're walking around and we've got this luggage just full of baggage, right? And we're toting it around everywhere we go. And it's heavy and it slows us down, but we're hanging on to all this baggage. It's making our back hurt. It's causing us back issues. It's heavy. We got to pay for it everywhere we go and travel. Like, it's a lot, right? But we don't know how to drop it off. And it's the craziest thing because a lot of us can recognize that we do have baggage. And even if you don't recognize that you have baggage, it's still causing you back pain and still causing you issues in your life, right? And so some of the things that we carry in those bags is grief, self doubt, old narratives, the pain that others have caused of. How many of us know someone who, when you look at them, you can see their trauma, right? You can see the pain that they've been caused because it shows in the way that they show up. We are not exempt from that experience. Just because you can see it in others doesn't mean it's not being displayed in you. And so it's important to know yourself. It's important to get to know your trauma so that you can understand the way that your trauma is showing up, the baggage that you're showing up with, and how you can start to unpack, right? Because if you don't surrender, you're not going to be able to unpack. And I think that's probably the most important part of what this episode is about. Recognizing our ability to surrender and our need to surrender so that we can start to unpack this trauma. I think for some people, including myself, surrender can feel very complicated because we don't necessarily recognize how our lack of ability to surrender is actually causing problems for us, right? And so when you are someone who's affected by your trauma and you're giving authority to your thoughts, your behaviors, and your reactions, and then also giving authority to other people's thoughts, behaviors, and reactions, you're actually a lot more powerless than you probably want to be, right? And so when you look at the scope of all of the things in your life that you have control over, we're talking about your thoughts and reactions and other people's thoughts and reactions and behavior. The truth is, we really don't have that much control. And when we put such an emphasis on trying to control those things, like you want to control your mom's behavior, you want to control your boyfriend's behavior, you want to control your kids' behavior, you want to control how someone else is thinking and how they're showing up for you. The truth is, all of that adds way more stress to you because those are things that you just don't have control over, right? And so you get frustrated, you get upset, and you feel powerless and you feel out of control. And then in turn, you actually try to get more control of those situations because you don't control them, right? And it's an endless cycle that we go through when truthfully, what we need to be able to do is surrender to the fact that we just simply are never going to have control of those things. And so I know for me, that has been very, very hard. And that is why I want to be able to talk about this in this episode, because once we recognize the ability to relinquish control and how to do that, I think that you'll start to maybe feel a little bit better in your experiences, in your relationships as well. Surrender starts with recognizing that you do not have control. I was reading an article from vitalityretreat.com, and there was this really great quote that they shared about surrender. So I want to share that with you guys. They state that surrender is a choice. It's one of the most empowering forms of release that you can experience. By surrendering, you are choosing not to fight or control your circumstances and emotions, but rather to be open and receive whatever comes your way, for better or worse. And I felt like that was such a beautiful excerpt just about the power of surrender, because, like I said, it can feel very powerless when you are wanting to control all the things, when you're wanting to know all the things. But on the flip side, and actually adversely, when you are able to surrender and let go of the fact that you won't have control, let go of your desires to have control, you actually open yourself up to receive more. So there are a lot of benefits of being able to surrender. And I think it's important that we understand how to do that. For me personally, I had to ask myself, like, how did I know that it was time to surrender? Like, for me, when I reached that point in my life. And so I'm going to tell you guys something that I experienced, because it was totally an experience. It wasn't like a aha moment just went off in my head randomly one day. It was an experience that I went through that caused me to realize that I needed to surrender. So in 2020, I had started a cleaning company. I started running a cleaning company with my boyfriend at the time. And when COVID kind of got crazy, I quit my job, because it was like, well, I'm doing pretty good in this, so I'm just going to leave my job. I quit my job to run my cleaning company full time. And I had contracted with this company that was my main contract. So they were my bread and butter. They were putting food in my mouth and food on my table for my kids. So I was getting a lot of work with them, and things were fine in terms of the work. But the representative that I was working with was very inappropriate with me, like all the time. And so going into it, it was something that I didn't think was going to be a big deal. So I just kind of kept going with the journey of it. Small flirtatious advances ended up growing into very large sexual advances. And so I was getting sexually harassed by this representative for this company every day when I was coming to work. And I didn't like how it was making me feel, but I also just couldn't say anything. And so I was having this experience in my body that I just wasn't aware of at the time. And so I would go home and tell my boyfriend, like, man, he is really getting on my nerves. Like, he's doing this, he's doing that. And so my boyfriend finally was like, look, I'm going to say something. And I was like, okay, cool. So he recognized that it was affecting me and that I was kind of afraid to speak up. And he spoke up on my behalf and told his manager about what was happening. And so I was thinking, like, thank God, it's going to stop and I won't have to deal with that anymore. And actually the opposite happened. So my boyfriend told his manager about what was happening, and it was like he doubled down on the behavior. And so I don't want to go into detail about like the things that this man was doing, but I'm telling you, it was some very egregious stuff, very inappropriate stuff. And then he started retaliating towards me. And so now he's in trouble and he starts retaliating. And I remember one day, like, I had busted my butt and I was cleaning. Like, I had hired cleaners at this point, and he was telling me like they were no good and they were leaving the units a mess. And so I would have to go behind them and clean up. And this was taking time away from my kids. And so I'm leaving my kids to come in here and clean when I had hired these people to clean. So it's causing me a lot of stress and anxiety, because I didn't want to be there to be sexually harassed by him. But then he was making me come clean because he said my cleaners weren't good. So nonetheless, I'm having to do all this extra work because he was upset that, he got in trouble. And eventually it just gets to a point where it was so overwhelming. I hated going to work. I didn't even want to clean for them anymore. He was being disrespectful on top of the fact that he had been sexually harassing me for months. So I just said, forget it, I'm going to quit. And so I terminate my contract with them, which was terrifying for me to do at this point because this was my only contract. They were my main source of money and income for my family. And so I didn't necessarily want to quit because I didn't want to lose the money, but I also didn't want to keep putting myself in this position where I'm having to deal with this very inappropriate behavior from this man. So I end up quitting and I end up actually suing the company because it was blatant sexual harassment and it was also documented. So they weren't really doing the things they needed to do as a company. So we end up suing them. And I was going to therapy at the time. And so I'm talking to my therapist about what I'm going through at my job. And one thing I remember over and over is that multiple people asked me, like, why didn't you say something? Because I let this behavior go on for way longer than I should have before I actually spoke up about it. And I remember there was a point where my therapist asked me, you know, why didn't you say something? Why didn't you feel like you could speak up for yourself and say something to him about his behavior? And I told her, well, I don't know. It was weird when she asked me. I didn't have the answers, but I just was thinking like, well, maybe I didn't speak up about that because I haven't spoke up about a lot of things that happened to me. And so in that moment, I remember telling her like, well, I was molested when I was 5 and I never really talked about that either. And she's on the phone with me and I'll never forget. And she said, Brittany, why why haven't you told me that? Why haven't we talked about that? And it was in that moment that it really hit me like, oh shit, like I never thought I would have to talk about that. And like maybe that's why I never said anything about the way he was treating me because I never spoke up about any of the ways that I was violated or mistreated in my life. And so I told her that. I said, I truly didn't think that I would ever need to talk about this. I thought that my life would be fine without talking about this. And she says, absolutely not. Like we need to talk about this. Up until that point, y'all, I had been in therapy for 3 years and I never had any intentions of telling my therapist that I was molested. I never thought that that was something that I would have to talk about. And so it was at that time that she's like, no, we absolutely need to talk about this. You need to be able to heal from that. And that's going to be a process for you. And so when we're talking about when did I recognize that I need to surrender, baby, that was my hands up, don't shoot moment right there. Because everything that I had been running from was now staring me right at the face. Like it's now like, okay, yeah, you have to talk about this. You cannot run from this anymore. You don't have the capacity to act like this doesn't exist anymore. And it was at that moment that I decided to give in, as that synonym says, and allow this process to unfold however it was going to unfold. Because up until that point, I thought that I had my life under control. I thought that I had that trauma under control. I thought that I was so buttoned up that I would never need to address that because honestly, I was like, I'm fine. That was me. Look at me. I'm fine. I'm successful. I have 2 beautiful children, like I'm fine is how I dealt with that. And I remember in that moment feeling so powerless because that was the one area of my life that I just simply had not allowed space for. And so when we're talking about surrendering, when we're talking about running from something for 25 years and then finally giving it life and finally allowing it space to just exist, I I had no power. Like when we're talking about surrendering in the moment, I didn't feel empowered. I didn't feel like I was releasing. I felt like I was cornered. You know what I mean? I felt like this black cloud had just came in front of me and I couldn't see anything. What I did know though was that I was going to get through it, my God, I just didn't know how long it was going to take, what it was going to look like. And all of those things were terrifying for me because, like I said, I thought I had control. And so when you come into dealing with your trauma, one thing that you have to recognize is it has its own process and it's not something that you can control, right? You can't control the way your body experiences things. You can't control those impeding thoughts that come to your mind because trauma is always going to be there. And it's always going to try to have power over you. And the greatest strength that we have in our healing journey is the ability to recognize we don't have the control, right? And allow those processes to take place and learn how to get through them. And so surrender, and even me having to surrender to that trauma, was the starting point of me being able to become new. But it was certainly a process that I had to endure. For me, because I didn't allow myself to see my trauma for so long, I just didn't have any idea just how much my trauma was controlling me. I was completely oblivious to the ways in which my trauma was showing up, to the ways in which my trauma was dictating my thoughts, my reactions, and my behaviors. I was oblivious to the ways that my trauma was affecting the way I interpreted other people's behaviors, other people's reactions, and other people's thoughts, right? Like, I had no idea. I just simply had no idea because I never allowed myself to even believe that I was someone who experienced that trauma in that way, right? Like, I definitely knew I had other issues, but when it came to this particular trauma, because I had blocked it out, I also blocked out the ways in which it was affecting me. Hey, girl, hey. Are you feeling like you're ready to start exploring your healing journey, but unsure of where to start? Have you considered therapy, but are limited on your resources? If you answered yes to either of these questions, then sis, I'm excited to tell you about my new workbook, It Starts With You. With over 80 pages of worksheets in our self-guided healing workbook, you'll have the opportunity to explore your inner world's deepest desires and fall in love with yourself all over again as you begin to do the healing work. As a life coach, I understand how challenging it can be to get the work done and do it alone. So I designed my workbook with you in mind, making sure you feel supported and loved while you navigate your healing process. Your journey to healing is calling, sis, and it starts with you. To order your copy today, visit Amazon.com and search It Starts With You by Britani Rose. Now back to today's episode. And so I want to get into understanding why surrendering is so hard, right? Because again, it was the hardest thing that I've ever had to do, was to now be able to relinquish what control I thought I had and allow this process to take form. And you guys, this process is still taking form. I opened my mouth and confessed with my mouth almost 2 years ago. In January, it'll be 2 years that I confessed with my mouth to others that I was molested and that I had been keeping it a secret for 25 years. It will be almost 2 years, and I'm telling you that I'm still going through this process. I still am going through this process. And for me, I have to give myself a lot of grace every single day because I tell myself, okay, this is a 25-year-old pain point for me. And it's not going to get better in 2 years. It's not going to get better in 5 years. That's a very long time to be, you know, dealing with things and harboring things in your body and not letting them out. And it's so crazy because somebody asked me the other day, like, why are you always crying now? And I didn't even have an answer. I didn't have an answer till I started recording this episode, but I recognized that I've had 25 years of emotions, pain, suffering, grief stored in my body that I've not let out. And so that's a long time. That's a really long time to be dealing with or not dealing with emotions and not letting them have their process, their due justice, and their due process 25 years ago. And so, yeah, I'm a year and a half in and I'm crying every day still. And I'm, experiencing grief and sadness that I didn't get to experience when I was 5 years old. Shit, when I was 7 years old, because who's to say that 2 years after that I would still be better? I would be in a better place. You know what I mean? And so all I know is that this is my process still. And if I hadn't surrendered, I wouldn't even be here. So I am thankful that I've done it. But as you can hear and see, it's still a very painful thing. Um, it's not a fun experience at all because you don't have control, you know? Case in point, I started this episode feeling good and now I'm crying, right? Because you don't have control over the way your body processes things. All you can do is allow yourself to feel whatever it is that you need to feel and to experience whatever you need to get to a place of healing. These tears deserve to come out. These feelings, this pain deserves to come out, right? And so when we're talking about why surrendering is so hard, there's a plethora of reasons. The first reason for me why it is so hard is because you have to surrender to the unknown. There's so much unknown that goes into this process. When we're talking about surrender, my first question is to who? To what? How? You know, those are things that I feel that I need answered before I can surrender. And the truth is, you're not going to get those. You're not going to get answers to any of those things. It's unknown. And that is what feels so terrifying when we're talking about surrender in the first place. No one, if you tell me, get in the car, the first thing I'm going to ask you, well, where are we going? You know what I mean? And that's just a human instinct. Most of us want to know what's going on, how things are going to play out, right? And when we surrender, it's terrifying because we are now letting go of the ability to, or I guess we're not letting go, but we're accepting. You have to accept that you're not going to know those things, that you're not going to have those answers. And for me, that felt life threatening. That felt very life threatening because for 25 years, I had no intentions of not being in control of my life. I felt like I had a strong grip and control over everything that was going on. And now having to face this, it has been the least amount of control I've ever had in my life. And at the same time, it's also been the most beautiful journey because I have been allowed to just go with the flow of where this thing is taking me, where this process is taking me, instead of feeling like I have to have the answers. Because truthfully, when I first surrendered, it's like, okay, it didn't feel good because, and then I started saying, like, I should have never talked about this. I should have never talked about this. Like, I so desperately wanted to cling on to my old reality, which was like, that never happened. Like, let's just pretend that never happened and get back to just doing life because I didn't have, like I said, any answers of when I was going to feel better. All I knew was there's this darkness over me. I had no idea when I was going to get better, had no idea when it was going to end, had no idea when the pain was going to stop. And that was terrifying. It didn't feel good. So there were times where I just wanted to go back to living in a world where I didn't talk about this. I wanted to go back to living in a world where this situation didn't happen, right? And that's because I didn't know when it was going to end. I remember vividly, I was like, and this kind of segues me into number two, but we want to have control, right? That's a huge part of not being able to surrender and a huge reason why people can't do it, because we want to control all the things. We want to control the outcomes. We want to know, okay, how is this going to happen? Where we're going to go? When is this going to be over? For me, it was like, okay, I think I'll be healed from this in about 3 months. That's what I literally told myself. I think I'll be done healing from this in about 3 months. What? What kind of crazy is that? Like, what kind of crazy is that? I literally remember telling my therapist, like, yeah, I want to focus like the next 6 months on this. Child, I just told you it's been almost 2 years and I still do not have any idea when I'm going to stop crying every day. Now, sometimes my tears are good tears because I'm like, whew, thank God I'm not where I was a whole year ago. But then it's like, there's still tears. I'm still feeling things, you know? And so I had to relinquish the idea that there was going to be some end point in this because the healing journey that doesn't exist. you're never going to have an end date on your healing journey. You're constantly going to be healing. You're constantly going to be becoming aware of things of yourself. And you're also, as a human, going to constantly be transitioning. And as you're transitioning, you're going to come into different feelings and emotions of where you're at in your life. And so I think when we feel like we have control, we really feel better. But the truth is, there's so many things that you just don't have control over. And like I said, those things can kind of add more stress to you, because I remember when I'm like, okay, I want to be done with this in about 6 months. And then when 6 months hit and I wasn't done, I was so upset. I was so frustrated. And one of the questions that I would ask my therapist was, why am I still feeling from this? When is this going to be done? Why am I still having pain? Why am I still crying? Why am I still having these feelings? I want to be done with this process. I want to be over it already. I just want to feel like myself again. That's what I remember saying over and over and over again. I just want to feel like myself again, because I don't feel like myself. And I hated that, right? But that also ties into the fake identity that I had created, that kind of felt like, okay, we don't address this, right? We don't acknowledge this pain. We don't feed into this, right? And so when I'm expecting or trying to control this outcome of, when is this going to be done? When am I going to stop feeling this? Subconsciously, what I'm doing is still feeding into that desire to control. And it's creating me more stress, because now I feel like I have a time limit on when I'm supposed to be done healing, or how I'm supposed to be getting through this. And the truth is, there is no time limit. I have no control of how my body is going to process this pain. And that is the truth. That is the truth. We don't have any control over that. We just don't. And so when we continue to try to put these unrealistic expectations on ourselves, on others, all we do is create more stress. All we do is create more heartache. All we do is create more pressure. And the truth is, it's not helpful. It actually does the opposite of what it is that we're looking to do. Most of the times we want to be renewed. We want to be able to walk into some new identity. We want to be able to experience the newness from our wounds. And that's the whole point of healing, right? Like, okay, well, this is how the old ways, or this is these old wounds and how they've hurt me. So if obviously I'm addressing this old to get to the new, sometimes it can feel like destination oriented. And it's just not the way the healing process works. And so surrender, as hard as it is, it's that part of it that makes it hard. What makes it hard is the fact that we want to control the process. The third reason why it's so difficult to surrender is because we are impatient, right? Like, we are impatient people, especially my generation. I feel like older people, they're way more patient and understanding. They're still human, obviously, but I think our generation, definitely, we subscribe to this microwave ready concept with everything, right? And if you try to apply that to the healing journey, good luck, baby. Good luck, because it's just not going to work. It's not going to work. If you try to apply that to anything, it's not going to work. Everything and everyone has a process. And I know for me and a lot of people, we're impatient because we want a certain outcome, right? Like, whether it's you want a certain relationship to work out for you, you want to be married, you want a certain result in a relationship, or you just want a result from something in general. How many of you, okay, I want this result, you don't see it happening the way you want it to, and then you go and start to fiddle in with it and start trying to put your hands on the process and seeing what can you do to expedite the process. And then when the things don't work out, or let's say the steps that you've taken to now try to manipulate your variables in the process actually backfire, or maybe make you lose the opportunity, or your goalpost gets pushed out further than you, now you're frustrated, now you're upset, now you're feeling some type of way, because what you intended to do actually didn't work in your favor. And that is why it's difficult to surrender, because we want what we want when we want it, right? Like, I can tell you right now, I am the queen of getting things done. I'm like, okay, if it's not happening, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it. And I have learned that that's just not the way life works, because everything and everyone has a process, and we have to be able to respect that if we're going to be able to fully surrender, and not only surrender, but also receive the benefits of surrendering. If I'm surrendering, that means that I'm trusting in the process. But if I'm also trying to manipulate the process, do I really trust it? Probably not. So at the end of the day, it's difficult to surrender because we're not patient enough to trust the process. And I'm preaching to myself, I'm telling you, because I currently am standing in the midst of some processes that I am like, God, when, what is the date? What is the time that this is going to be done? What is it going to look like when it's finished? And I don't have those answers. And I can tell you right now that it is absolutely frustrating. I stand in the midst of situations that are so frustrating for me because I don't have the ability to determine when it's going to be done, when I'm going to get a result, the result I want. Forget the result. I want the result I want. Not just any result. I want the result I want. And there's so many of us that operate like that. And so being impatient is another reason why surrendering is hard, right? The fourth reason why surrendering is so hard is because we don't want to feel pain, right? I think for me specifically, especially as I just mentioned, I wanted to be done with this healing process because I didn't want to feel the pain. I was even willing to go back to living a lie of this didn't happen to me and I don't need to deal with this because it was hurting so bad. And when you get to that point, it's like, okay, you have to choose a path. And I tell people this all the time because a lot of people will ask me, well, how do you do the work? How do you do the work? How do you do the work? And I say, I'm going to tell you the truth. I'm going to tell you the truth. You have to choose. You have to choose a path that you're willing to take. Being broken, painful. Some of the most painful things I've ever experienced in my life is being broken, right? And then healing. Honey, this is also some of the most painful work I've ever done in my life. And so when we're talking about choosing a path, often people use those vices. People use the ways that they feel their voids because they think that's the path of least resistance, right? It's like, well, I'm already in pain, so I'm going to just numb the pain. I'm already hurt, so I'm just going to, smoke this weed or drink this alcohol and do this because at least it's going to make me feel better. Yeah, it's going to make you feel better temporarily, but it's really not going to make you feel better in the long run. And I tell people all the time when we're talking about healing and you're choosing the path that you think is least resistance, I look at it like this. Yes, I can go smoke that blunt and did, hun, for 2 years. I'm not gonna lie. I had never really smoked weed, and I started smoking weed because the pain was hard. When we're talking about this healing, it was very hard for me to deal with, and so I just started smoking because there were times when I just didn't simply want to feel it. And I'm okay with the fact that I chose that process because I know myself enough to know that I wasn't going to be smoking forever. And now I'm 30 days clean of smoking because I surrendered to my habit. Now, it was a process and it still is. But what I'm saying is, even with the vices that we're choosing, there comes a point where you have to surrender to that as well. And so you're choosing a path that's either going to yield you the benefit, or you're choosing a path that's going to continue to yield you hurt, continue to yield you heartache, right? And so it's like, okay, I can either choose to be broken and continue to perpetuate brokenness, or I can choose to heal. And yes, it's going to hurt, but it's going to hurt less the more I'm willing to go down that path, right? And so for me, I choose to do the work. I choose to heal because I know that brokenness is not only going to continue to break me, but it's going to break my children. It's going to break my relationships. It's going to break my opportunities. And I'm going to continue to deteriorate should I choose that path for myself, right? And so surrendering is difficult because we don't want to experience pain, right? There's so many people that they know that their addiction is hurting them. They know their addiction is hurting their family. They know and they see what the addiction is doing to not only them but the people that they love in their lives. They know that their vices and the ways that they're choosing to try to fill their voids isn't working, but they would rather do it because it's at least getting them some temporary pleasure from the situation. And when we choose those temporary pleasures over, truthfully, the long-term suffering of healing that's going to yield you less suffering down the line, um it doesn't feel like you're making the best choice. It feels easier to choose the path where I'm going to temporarily rid myself of this pain. And that's why it's difficult to surrender. And so, y'all, the fifth reason why surrendering is difficult for folks is because at its core, surrender requires vulnerability. And that is something that so many of us struggle with. I know for sure when it comes to this healing journey, specifically for me, allowing myself to be seen, even to my therapist, was just something that I couldn't fathom. I couldn't fathom. I could not fathom, right? Because again, I had been thinking that nothing was wrong, that I didn't need to heal from this. So why would I open myself up to such unknown, such vulnerability, and put myself in such a vulnerable position? It wasn't something that I was looking forward to, and it's not something that feels good. So when we put ourselves in situations to be vulnerable, in spaces to be vulnerable, it's terrifying. It's terrifying, right? I know for me, it's like this figurative moment where I have to open my heart. I have to open my heart posture. I have to basically, I'm on my knees because I know that I have no control anymore, right? Like if I'm letting this thing run its course, if I'm letting this thing exist, if I'm just letting things be, then that means I don't have control. And being okay with that is very difficult. Being okay with subjecting myself to experience all these emotions has been terrifying and has been very hard. It's not been something that I've enjoyed every part of the milestone, but I will say that I've grown to just become comfortable with the vulnerability part of it, because I don't get what I need when I'm not willing to be vulnerable, or I don't put myself in a position to the universe to receive what I need by not allowing myself to be open. I think at its best, vulnerability is just being open. And that's hard for a lot of us because sometimes we're closed off. A lot of times we're closed off. And I think we also live in a society where they kind of encourage being closed off. They kind of encourage this cold-hearted, like, to yourself and non-communal way of existing. But vulnerability is such a superpower, and that's kind of what I'm learning in my journey. I'm able to show up and be vulnerable in spaces that I never intended to be vulnerable with or in, and seeing how, even if it's not necessarily benefiting the other people that I'm in situations with or other spaces that I'm impacting, it's helping me. It's helping me because it's changing my heart posture. It's allowing me the space to just be open and receive. When we're closed off, we're not able to receive. And you can just think about that in such a simple context as a door. If you have a door that's constantly closed, who can come in? What can come in? What can walk in? What can walk out? Nothing, because the door is closed. If you just even crack it, right? If you just crack the door open, you stand the chance of at least something pushing its way in, right? But if the door is closed, if the door is locked, if your heart is closed, if your heart is locked, nothing can be received and nothing can also come from it. And so the reason why vulnerability is so hard is because all of our trauma lives in the heart. It does. It affects our heart in a lot of ways, and it affects our spirit. And it's terrifying to open our hearts to anything, to receive, even if it's healing, right? It's terrifying to do that because you still have to crack it. You still have to open it, right? And that's just hard. And I completely understand that. And so vulnerability is something that has to be practiced. It has to be welcomed, though, as well. And so I feel like understanding why surrendering so hard, especially with these different concepts, vulnerability probably being the biggest one, and next to control, will help us to be able to learn how it is that we can start to be more vulnerable, how we can start to release control so that we can surrender to ourselves and have this process that we so rightly deserve. Like everybody deserves to heal. And in order to heal, we have to be able to surrender. All right, so we're going to pivot into learning how to surrender, right? And so before we get into these strategies, I want to let you guys know that even just given with the definition that we had for surrender, we have to change the way we look at it because it is something that we want to do. It's something that we need to do. And it's something that we know benefits us. How do we know it benefits us? Well, I can tell you when we're talking about surrendering, for me, what I look at it as, there's a lot of thoughts, there's a lot of reactions, there's a lot of behaviors that I wanted to release, right? That we all want to release, right? And in order for us to release those things and make space for the new, we have to put ourselves in that position. And that's what surrendering is going to do. I want to make space. We want to make space for all that God has for us or all that the universe has for us to receive. And in order for us to do that, we have to put ourselves in a position to be able to release some things that just simply no longer serve us. So I want to preface this with letting you guys know that surrendering is not giving up on life. Surrendering is giving up on fighting with life and actually allowing life to work with you and not you working against life. When you gain the courage to stop fighting with life, you can begin to start working with life. And that is what we want to do. That's where we experience abundance. That's where we experience our power because we're open. Surrender is complete acceptance of what is, plus faith that all is well, even without my input. Even without my input, right? So some of this process of how to surrender is simply going to be asking yourself some questions. I wanted to make this as simple as possible, and I found some really helpful tools and tips from tinybuddha.com that help us just really put things into perspective of how to surrender in a specific moment. Number one, ask yourself this question: what am I afraid will happen if I let go of control? When you pinpoint the fear, you have to question its validity by asking, is this real? That is something that I have to do frequently because my thoughts and my fears and my insecurities sometimes tell me things that aren't true, right? And so when we start to have those thoughts, we know what feelings affect our thoughts affect our beliefs, and then our beliefs affect our behaviors. So it all starts with understanding the things that we're thinking in our minds, right? And being able to question those things. Is what you're thinking, is what you're trying to stir up in your mind, is it valid? Start questioning those thoughts that come to your mind, because once you're able to stop them here, you can stop them from flowing through your body and becoming behaviors. And I think having those real conversations with yourself, like simply asking, what am I afraid of happening if I let go of control? That's a real conversation that you have to have with yourself in any given moment. When you find yourself feeling anxious over certain situations, that's a great indication that you might be struggling with your ability to let go of control, right? When you find yourself trying to dive in more, trying to pry more, trying to force more, right? That's a great time to sit back and ask yourself that question. What am I afraid of happening? Should I let go? For me, for example, I can tell you right now, when it comes to my anxious ways or my fear of abandonment, and there's some times where I've been in relationships with people, or all my relationships, really. I don't feel like any of them are exempt from this, but sometimes when I'm not able to understand why someone's doing something, I want to get to the bottom of it, right? And like I might even subconsciously be trying to control their behavior. So then I start showing up a certain way, right? And I might start calling you more often. I might start asking you more questions, or I might start just having more doubts and now projecting those doubts onto you, right? And so when I'm asking myself in those moments, what am I afraid of happening if I just let go of control? Because it's one thing to have a thought or a fear that certain things are going to happen. But the moment I have those thoughts and fears and they transpire into behaviors, I'm now being controlled by my thoughts and my fears, right? And so asking myself that question, what am I afraid of, that's now got me transitioning from having that fear to now putting it into actions and behaviors. Well, I can tell you right now, a lot of times it's my fear of abandonment. Maybe it's your fear of rejection. Maybe it's your fear of not being good enough. Maybe it's your fear that you're not going to be wanted, or you're not going to be valued, or they're not going to love you. Those are all valid reasons of why we would behave that way, but it doesn't mean that it's valid, right? So question it. Ask yourself, well, is it true that this person doesn't love me? I literally just had a situation recently where I was just like, now I'm telling my business, but I'm going to do it because I think it's important. I had a situation recently where I am dealing with someone that I love immensely, and like, I had spent time with this person and it was great, and I'm like, okay, I know that this person loves me 100%. There's no doubt in my mind. So something happened recently, and because of the way this person responded or lack thereof, now I'm like, wait, do they love me? And in my mind, that is the question. It's like, do they love me? I'm doubting whether this person loves me. And so what happened is, now that I'm doubting whether or not you love me or not, I'm upset because I don't feel like you love me. And now, because I'm upset that you don't love me, well, now I'm mad at you because I don't feel like you love me. And guess what's happening now that I feel like you don't love me? I'm treating you like you don't love me. And now I'm actually trying to protect myself because I love you, but I don't feel like you love me. So that means I need to change the way I deal with you. And so I hit this person up and I'm like, we need to change the way we're dealing with each other, because you know what? I just feel like I'm not valued and it's really bothering me. And the person was like, WTF, because when did I ever say any of those things? And it was a moment where I had to eat my words, and I have to deal with now the repercussions of me showing and displaying to this person that I don't feel like they love me. Now, I'm not saying that the thought couldn't be in my mind, because the thought was totally there, and the insecurity and the fear was there. Did I have to go as far as I did though? No, I could have stopped myself at the fear and questioned, is it valid? Is it valid? And I didn't do that. I went full force with, you know what? You don't love me and I don't like that. It's making me not feel valued and I want to protect myself from you. So I'm going to go on with my life. That's how it was making me feel. And that's the way that I've responded in the past. And so we have to be able to challenge those thoughts constantly. We have to be able to sit back and just sit with the feeling like, I don't feel loved. But I can just sit with it. I don't have to respond. And it doesn't have to, my thoughts don't have to become reactions and behaviors. They really just don't. So I encourage you highly to try that on for size, questioning the validity of the thoughts and, feelings that come to your mind. Number two, find out whose business you're in. I thought this was a great tool because it kind of points back to the control that we either have or don't have of a situation. And when you're able to pinpoint whether you have control or not, you're able to kind of either release or take action, right? But so your business is what you can directly control. Your business is the things that you can influence directly with yourself and your own actions, right? And you have to ask yourself, am I there? When you find yourself in situations, ask yourself, is this my business? Is this something that I can influence? Am I there at that spot, right? Or am I in someone else's business? Is this something that someone else can control ultimately? Is this something that ultimately someone else has the power of? Because if that's the case, then you need to step back in your place. Because if you step out of place, you're going to be stressed, depressed, and all the S's because you don't have no control. And that's when we start going into overdrive, trying to gain control of a situation that rightfully we're just not going to have control over. So a great way to reel yourself back in, ask yourself, is this my business? And if it ain't your business, let it go. Just simply take your hands off of it. And that's hard. That's very hard. But it's also very helpful because it allows you to just operate in the power of what it is that you can control and you can't control. And it also allows other people to operate in their control without feeling pressured by you. Number three, this is a great question to ask yourself. when you feel yourself in situations where you're feeling very strained and stressed and tense because you're trying so hard to control something, you ask yourself, would letting go feel like freedom? Mm, 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 Would letting go feel like freedom? And if so, allow the feeling of freedom to guide you. Allow that experience of freedom to be your reward for letting go. I think that sometimes it's so hard because we're fighting with ourselves internally, right? Like we're truly fighting with ourselves on the inside when it comes to making these changes. But we have to start being guided by something outside of ourselves. And I know for me, healing is a very liberating experience. Healing is freedom. And so when we're talking about being guided by freedom, that's a reward. And that's something that you should reward yourself with often. And if you find yourself in a situation where you're starting to feel tense in your body, you're starting to feel stress, ask yourself, would letting go feel like freedom? And if it does, gift yourself with the reward of feeling free. You deserve it. We all do, right? All right, number 4. This is one that I'm teaching it and preaching it for me and you, okay? But be okay with not knowing. Just be okay with not knowing. And that's so hard, right? Because we want to know. We feel like it's going to offer us some security. And that's the truth. You feel like if you know the answers to XYZ, you're going to feel more secure. And you may. You very well may, but you can also find security in not knowing. Not knowing does not equal not secure. And so I think the more we can embrace not knowing, the more we can be okay not knowing, we can allow ourselves to look at that for what it is, because truthfully, that's the ego that wants to feel secure. Your ego wants to feel like everything is in control and they have the ability to anticipate and move and shuck and jive the way you want to. When the truth is, that's not how life works. There are so many elements of life that are unknown that happen all the time. That unknown bill you got, your car broke down on the side of the freeway, your kid broke their arm. There are so many things that happen in our lives that we just don't have control over and that we just don't know are going to happen. And so when you can release your desire to know and you can embrace not knowing, you open yourself up to just being able to flow. And you also, I feel like, get to operate in more of an authentic sense because you're not being led by your ego who wants to know all the things. And so lastly, y'all, practice gratitude. Practice gratitude. I can't tell you enough how much the universe loves when we're just able to be grateful for where we're at with what we have, with who's around us, with what we do know, with what we don't know. When we're just in a place of constantly being grateful. Oh my God, I woke up this morning. I opened the refrigerator for breakfast and there was food. I went to work and had a job. I got in my car. You see how I just skipped getting in my car to get to work? I got in my car that turned on and got me to work. Okay. At the end of my 2-week cycle, I'm getting a paycheck. And then with that paycheck, I'm going to pay my bills. My kids woke up. They went to school. They came home today. There are so many things that we can be grateful for on a day-to-day basis. And I think that when we're able to operate in that place, instead of like, okay, well, this is what I want. This is what I'm trying to go after. This is what I want to pursue. I don't have this yet. I want to get there. What we're really doing when we're doing that is basically kind of telling the universe that we want, but we're not grateful for what we have. And that demeanor in and of itself is just kind of self-sabotaging, right? Like it doesn't really allow you to operate from a place of humility, from a place of gratefulness. And it also, I think, because you're so focused on what you want, what you don't have, you actually close yourself off to receiving. And I know for me, there's a lot of things that I want so badly right now. Like I do. I'm in the middle of transitioning and coming into some really amazing opportunities for myself. And I want those things so badly. But I also have been recently just trying to take a step back and be like, as much as I want those things, as much as I desire those things, I'm also so grateful with what I have right now and where I'm at right now. And I think that sometimes when we lose that balance, we get frustrated because the more we focus on what we don't have or what we want, the less we're able to really just experience gratefulness and gratitude, which puts us in a position to receive. So again, when you find yourself focused on, well, I want that job, I want that relationship, I want that pay raise at work, or I want that car, even just like I want what that person has, because I feel like that's a place where a lot of us sometimes subconsciously find ourselves, especially with my generation, especially with social media. There are a lot of people that will put others on a pedestal of like, well, I want what that person has, I want that life, I want the results that that person has. Well, your process is your process. And even if you're seeing somebody else with something else, or you're inspired by somebody else, or you're motivated because you see somebody else with something, you still have to be grateful for what you do have, because certainly you have something that somebody else doesn't have, right? So when we put ourselves in a situation to be grateful, when we're not comparing ourselves to others, when we're not trying to be like others, we're demonstrating to the universe that we're grateful for our current state of being. And I think that that's a huge element of surrender, because it also allows you to just be present. Like, yes, I might want certain things. I might want to be in different positions. I might want to grow and advance to be somewhere else. But I'm also going to just have gratitude for where I'm at within my own process. Everybody has their own process. Don't be fooled by what you see on social media with people and where they're at with their lives. You don't know what they had to go through to get there. You don't know what those people had to overcome. You don't know what trials and tribulations are currently standing in their way that they're having to overcome to even show up to where they're at right now. And so be grateful for your own circumstances. Be grateful for where you're at in your life, and be grateful for the things that the universe has given to you. And I think that when you're able to do that, you're able to receive more and actually operate from the place of getting to where you want to go, right? And so that wraps up the 5 ways to surrender. And I want to close it off with reminding you that surrender is the complete acceptance of what is, plus faith that all is well, even without my input. That means even if I don't touch it, right? If I do nothing, I trust that all is well, right? Not only do I trust that all is well, I accept everything that is, for better or for worse. That is the full power and ability of surrender. And so I really, really pray, y'all, that this episode has helped you all. I know for me, again, this is a very hard thing to do. I think it's tough to let go. I know that it's difficult to release and make space for something new and unknown, and to allow a process bigger than you to consume you and kind of engulf you. But when you trust God, you got to trust. And that's just what it is. You have to trust that all is well, even without your input, right? And as difficult as that is, trust that there is reward in the freedom that you will experience from not putting your hands on all the things and from allowing yourself to just exist. I think that in today's day and age, just even in this healing journey and all of the things that we've learned about in this season, none of those things are tangible without us being able to have our hands up moment of recognizing that we don't have control all the time, right? We don't have control over the trauma that entered our lives. We didn't ask for those things to happen to us. We certainly didn't request to be mistreated by people. And we certainly, like I said, didn't have any desires for certain things to happen in our lives. But life is going to be a continuous cycle of unexpected events, twists, and turns. And it's our jobs to be able to process those things that are happening. Life is all about getting knocked up and getting back up again. And the healing journey is no different, right? But the one thing that I've learned is surrender alone allows you to get through these things, allows you to acknowledge these things, allows you to invite in new ways of living, thinking, and being that help you become a better person. And so through faith, it is the vehicle that allows us to surrender and get to these destinations like self-love, emotional awareness, forgiveness, and all the plethora of other things that we've talked about this series. And so it is my prayer for you that this information has been helpful. This information is stuff that you can go out into the world and you can tell others. And you can also just demonstrate to yourself, because you deserve to experience the fullness that is you. You are not your trauma. You are not those terrible things that happen to you. You are not a reflection of the ways that people treat you. You are a beautiful and incredible and amazing person, and you are valuable, and you are worthy of having a life that you love to live. And I believe that through us all healing, we can get to that space, and not only get to that space, but encourage others to get to that space and create a better place for not just ourselves, but our children and our loved ones to exist in and have a richer life. And so that's what this whole montage has been. That's what this whole series has been about. And I just pray that this information has been helpful to you. And so I want to, again, thank you all so much for tuning in to this season of the Soul Good podcast. I have grown so much from this experience. I hope that you all have enjoyed it, and that you all are able to grow as well as we do this work and the work that's not fun all the time, but definitely this work that allows us, like I said, to just live better lives and be better people and be free. That's what we want. We want to be free. We want to be free for real, not for fake. We want to be free for real. And this healing journey is the way that we're going to get there. And so again, I just thank you so much for supporting this platform. If y'all all have not followed me or found us on social media, I encourage you to find us. We are on TikTok and Instagram at the Soul Good Podcast. We also invite you to send your application, submit your application for applying to be a co-host on next season of the Soul Good Podcast to the soulgoodpodcast@gmail.com. Lastly, if there's anyone that you know that you think could benefit from this information, that you think might like just to hear what we're talking about, that you want to invite into our space in the Soul Good Podcast, please share this episode with them, or an episode that you think they might like. And again, y'all, I truly thank you from the bottom of my heart. I'm excited for season 2. I'm ready to get to work in a couple months. Season 2 will be returning in 2024 in January. So I look forward to seeing you all again. I thank you for your patience. One thing I'm surrendering as we come into season 2 is my desire to be perfect, because your girl has not been consistent this series. And that's simply because I was attached to this desire to be perfect. But as we have talked about surrender this episode, it freed me. Okay. So I am surrendering to my desires to be perfect. And we truthfully will probably have bi-weekly episodes next season. But certainly I'm looking forward to being more intentional about consistency in this space to give you guys the content that you keep coming back for. So again, thank you. I am your host, Brittany Rose. Thank you for tuning in, and happy Soul Good Sunday to all of you beautiful people. All right, Soul Good family, that marks the end of season 1 on the Soul Good podcast. And I truly hope that after today's episode, you're feeling like embracing the power of surrendering and allowing yourself to exist and flow with the currents of this thing called life. I know firsthand how surrendering can feel scary, but I hope after this episode, you're inspired to find the courage to be free. We thank you so much for your loving support, and we can't wait to see you next season. If you're interested in co-hosting your very own episode of the Soul Good Podcast, please send us an email with your story to thesoulgoodpodcast@gmail.com. We look forward to hearing from you, and we thank you for sharing this beautiful space with us. Until next time.